Hi, I'm Shannon Gunn Emery. Welcome to Adventures in Law and Life. Now, I've been a lawyer for almost 20 years. It will be 20 years on All Saints' Day, November 1st, 2022. Most of that time has been spent as a criminal defense lawyer, and since this is the first episode of Adventures in Law and Life, I thought it would be fitting to start where it should start. At the beginning. That would be with my father. My father, Bruce Gunn, was a criminal defense lawyer. His father, A.O. Gunn, was also a lawyer. His father was a lawyer, and his father was a lawyer. So there was a lot of law in our household. People often wonder, what was it like growing up in a lawyer's house? Well, when my sister and I went to our grandfather's house in Cape Breton, we would go upstairs and play with all of his law stuff, his seals, the big red wax ones. He had gold seals too. We would stamp everything, make fake appointments. We'd pretend to be answering the phone, checking in with clients. We played lawyer. Now, that may seem strange to you, but for my sister and me, it was fantastic. Every now and then, as a kid, my dad would bring me to court with him. That was before Bring Your Kid to Work Day was a thing. And I really enjoyed it. Watching my father in court made me nervous as well. He looked so angry. But then, as soon as we left the courthouse, he would turn around, smile, and we'd go out for ice cream. My own children have spent many hours in the office and in courtrooms. And while they have each struck out on their own paths, they have an understanding of law. And now my little granddaughter and I play, let's get the client out on bail. Looking back on how I came to law, it is clear my father had the biggest impact on me. When we were little, law was everywhere, especially at night. My father would take after-hours calls. That means from people in custody, people who had just been picked up by the police and didn't know what to do. Often these were people who were charged with impaired driving. That was my dad's favorite area of the law, and while I didn't understand that when I was little, I certainly understood it later. So at night, he would be giving advice to people who sometimes were mildly intoxicated, sometimes not at all, and sometimes grossly intoxicated. And I'm not sure if that's why he would yell so strongly that the neighbors could hear him, but we all knew the advice to give to people because we heard it yelled so often. In fact, one day, my parents left my sister and me alone at home. We were around 11 or 12 at that time. Apparently, we were old enough to be left alone safely at home, and we were old enough to give legal advice. A call came in. I picked up the phone. It was a person in custody, so I asked with calm and confidence, "And what are you charged with?" And, yes, impaired driving, I see. Okay, do we have privacy? Yes, we do. Okay, so how much do you weigh? And then I gave a little pause because there was always a little pause after my dad asked that. And how much did you have to drink? And another little pause because my dad always paused after that. And then I said, okay, so you have to blow. You'll have to blow at least twice. Keep blowing until they tell you to stop. As well, you have the right to remain silent. Don't say anything. Don't tell them anything other than your name, address, and phone number. Got it? Great. It was just like being back in my grandfather's house. I wish I'd had a seal or a little memo pad to write a note. My parents came home, and I somewhat sheepishly told them that this call had come in from this person in custody. It had started to occur to me that maybe there was something wrong with me giving legal advice, even though I was pretty sure my advice was solid. There was a pause. What did you tell him? My father asked. I told him to blow, and I told him to remain silent. He looked at me and went, good. And that was the start of my career. Although I tried to avoid law at first. I thought, I wanted to be my own person. I wanted to do my own thing. So I went into education. And I really enjoyed it. But eventually, I just got sucked back into law. I couldn't help it. How could I? With a family like mine, especially a father like mine, I think it was inevitable. So I started articling to my father. I had thought about articling to Kelly Dawson, but my father looked aghast and told me he had articled to his father had articled to his father, and his father had articled to his father, and so I could damn well article to my father. Swearing was his, not mine. Anyway, so that settled that. I articled to my father, and was very glad I did. I learned a lot. My father was very smart. He loved impaired driving cases and anything relating to breath testing. Now, with the Intoxilizer 5000C, the instrument that they used for a lot of the time when I was articling and growing up as a lawyer, there was a little mason jar filled with liquid called the alcohol standard. That standard had to be changed every 15 days or 50 tests. And then, if the instrument tested it and it gave a result of 100 plus or minus 10 milligrams %, then we knew the machine was working properly and we could try using it on people. Well, one day, my father was looking at disclosure and he thought, no. The police disclosure indicated that changing the standard had only taken about 2 to 3 minutes and then they went on to calibrate it. But that wasn't possible. Usually it takes about 25 minutes for the alcohol standard to heat up to the requisite 34.0 degrees plus or minus 0.2. So the police were not heating up the standard using the traditional proper method by using the heater in the mason jar. Oh no, they were heating it up in the microwave with their chicken noodle soup. At least that was my dad's suspicion based on the paperwork, and later it was confirmed that he was right. Yeah, he was also part of a group that realized that the mouthpieces in a screening device had been modified, and he was successful, along with a number of others, in arguing that that screening device was no longer an approved screening device because it wasn't approved that way. However, there were other things about my dad that made him an exceptional lawyer and an exceptional person. I think that it was the appeals that allowed me to appreciate fully how skilled my father was as a cross-examiner. A party appeals when they were unhappy with their first result in the lower court. So, for example, if my father was unsuccessful at trial for a client, that client might decide to go one step up to the Court of Queen's Bench, now known as Court of King's Bench. Or if we won and the Crown was unhappy, which they often were, we would end up going to appeal but as respondent. Appeals are different. They are based on the record below, and so to prepare an appeal, I had to write a memorandum or a factum, and that was always based on a transcript. The transcript is a recording written down of everything that everyone said in court. And sometimes I would be reading along, trying to figure out, where's my father going with this line of questioning? I just couldn't quite see where it was leading, and then all of a sudden, wham! And I was like, wow. And I knew I wanted to do that. I was amazed by his command of the facts. He would hear one little word differently, and yet when I had read it, I didn't even see it differently. But when I went back, he was right. But even though he was incredibly hard on some of these officers, he would then turn around and teach them how to do it better so that they could defeat him the next time. He actually put on courses for the RCMP on how to do impaired driving cases right. And I kept thinking, aren't you worried about, teaching yourself out of a job? But he said, no, don't worry. He said, if there is a stupid, lazy way of doing something, you can bet that somewhere someone is doing it that way, and that will happen regardless of how often you show them the right way of doing it. Turns out he was right. My dad loved technology too. He had a printer in the courtroom at one point. He had some of the first computers. If there was a cell phone out there, he needed to have it. He loved technology. I just know that what I'm doing right now with you is so amazing. He would have loved that. So as I was planning for this podcast, I was wondering what would I want to tell you was my father's greatest gift to me or to others. He was so smart. He was so curious. He was hardworking. He was like a machine. But it was his generosity that really struck me. Generosity to the point of being crazy almost. And when I say generosity, I don't mean just financially. He was very generous financially. He gave money away very freely, almost as if he didn't like it or didn't want too much of it himself. But my father was generous in other ways too. Pro bono work was very important in our office, and it still is. So pro bono work is where lawyers work for free. We're not talking about legal aid, where they also expect us to work for free. No, this is really where you start and finish a file for nothing. Pro bono is also not the friends and family discount, because we offered pro bono work to really the poorest. Not on the basis of whether we liked them or not, but just whether they needed us and yet couldn't afford us. My father also had a parents discount, which was basically if a kid came in with their parent, he would, for some reason, discount fees. I always thought that was strange because with parents, they're anxious to help their kid out and make sure they're okay. Now, when I say kids, I'm talking about adult kids, the 20, 24, 25-year-olds who come in with their parents. And the parents have resources. Those are the files where you don't have to worry that the client isn't going to end up paying at the end. Their parents will ensure the bill is paid. But my father felt sorry for the parents stuck with these troublemaking kids. And as he explained that to me, he gave me a look that made me wonder how much trouble had I been. But pro bono work was really important for my dad. It was a way for us to give back to the community. My father would just never want to see anyone who wanted our help to go away unaided because of lack of fees. He also felt very strongly about me doing a lot of pro bono work. One day, this gentleman came into our office. He was very tall. He had a very strange air about him. I don't know how to describe it. I hate to say that he looked like, the son of Frankenstein. It's a terrible way to put it. It really is. But he was very, very big, and he was kind of slow. There was something not quite right about him. And he had an accent and maybe a speech impediment. I'm not really sure. Anyway, he came into my office. He looked gigantic to me, but then I'm really small. And he just looked at me and he said, "Your father?" And I'm just sitting there going, yeah? "Your father said you would help me?" And I'm just blinking because my father hadn't told me anything about this person that I was supposed to help. But I assumed also that it was true because it was just the kind of thing my father would do. And I said, "Okay, what is it?" So he starts telling me about this landlord-tenant dispute that he had, but he ended up being charged with, I don't even remember what anymore. But it was something violent related because he's just kind of gave off that vibe. Anyway, I ended up asking my father about it, and my father said, oh, yeah, that's right. I was in court, and this guy was taking up a ton of time. He was, going on and on. He was unrepresented, and the judge was getting impatient. And I thought to myself, my father was getting impatient because he wanted to get to his trial. So, I just intervened, and I just said that we would help him. Like, okay. Of course, that meant I would help him. And so, of course, we did. Now, I had to prepare this client very carefully for trial because sometimes he would get up and march around, flail his arms about when he was really excited about something, and he would yell. But one charming quality that he had is that he seemed to see me as a small defenseless thing. Thank goodness he did, because when he would start getting excited and start yelling, I would say to him, I am going to call him Igor. I'm sorry, but I am. Igor, my ears, you're hurting my ears. And then he would go, oh, sorry, Madam Shannon, sorry, Madam Shannon, oh. And he would go really soft. So I realized that's the trick. I just have to go, oh, Igor, my ears. He went, oh, it's okay. Sorry, Madam Shannon. At those moments, he was so sweet. So we were getting ready for trial. We get into court, and my client is very excitable, but I would just put my little tiny hand on his enormous hand and go, Igor, it's okay. Oh, okay. We would keep going. I whispered to the sheriffs, don't leave. Do not leave me alone. And they're like, no, we're not leaving. I'm like, okay. All of a sudden started to yell. I'm like, oh, Igor, my ears. The judge was looking at me with wide eyes. We got through whatever it was, and we were actually successful, which was amazing. I don't even remember exactly what happened. I just remember thinking, thanks, Dad. That was a very interesting file. And I meant it. He needed our help. Poor Igor wasn't given a lot of advantages in life. Another interesting file that my father volunteered me for, theft by mail. Another interesting file that he volunteered me for, nickel plating environmental case. I'm not kidding. The things that my father volunteered me for. My father also taught me that if someone asks for our help, we should always give it, especially if it was a lawyer or a student at law asking. But my father wouldn't just stop at giving his ideas or his thoughts or his opinions on the case. No, he would actually offer our precedents. Now, that for me, coming right out of law school, made me uncomfortable. That may surprise you, but law school is very competitive. I am very competitive. I didn't want to give away our trade secrets. I didn't want to give away our right to counsel charter briefs or our precedent for that particular issue on an appeal. We worked hard to build those. Those are ours. They're what sets us apart. But my father would just hand them over. And I started to see that he was right. But it was a slow process, and once he really put me to the test. So I had interviewed a client. I had told him he had great arguments. I told him all about what the arguments were, how strong they were, why they would work, how they would work, etc. But he didn't hire me. Oh well, that's fine. So I just forgot about the client. It happened quite often, especially when we were giving opinions for free. We got a lot of tire kickers. Anyway, one day, a few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. It was from a lawyer that this other client of mine that hadn't decided to hire me decided to hire. And so the letter went something like this. Dear Madam, I have recently been hired by your ex-client, and he told me that you said he had a number of really good arguments. I was wondering if you could tell me what they were and how to run them. Yours truly, other lawyer, other annoying, incompetent, irritating lawyer. I was very indignant. I thought, wow, like you take my client and you can't figure out what the arguments are and you want me to spoon feed them to you for free. So I marched into my father's office with this letter, plunked it down in front of him with my arms crossed and just said, look at this. And he said, write the letter. I said, are you kidding? Like, write the letter? Like, he just took my client and he doesn't seem to have a clue as to how to run the file. And I have to write this letter? Write the letter. I was so mad, but my dad was in charge and I didn't have the ability to say anything else. So I wrote the letter. I wrote how to run all the defenses. I added the cases in support. I basically gave him a roadmap as to how to run the whole thing. Was I mad? I was steaming the whole time I was writing that letter, so mad. But my father had pity on that lawyer. He had known that lawyer for a long time, and he knew that lawyer struggled, and he was more generous than I was. Looking back now, I'm glad I wrote that letter, and I'm grateful to my father that he insisted that I do it. So we share everything, and our precedents for lawyers are so precious. But I've also been the recipient of generosity from other lawyers. Reshma Bambani at KBL Law recently just opened up her precedents with the approval of her partners in a new area of law that I was interested in. She was generous, she was kind, and she gave me a lot of her time. And she's not the only one. I've received similar acts of generosity from others, and so my father is right. Those other lawyers are right. I definitely see that now. For all of his good qualities, my father did have some other sides to him. He was a bit of a control freak. I knew that. I had grown up with him. But when it came to law, it manifested itself in ways I had not expected. One time, we were out in Lac La Biche, and we both had trials there, so we'd gone together. I ran my trial first, and things were going very well. I was very happy, other than for the fact that every now and then, as I was asking questions or starting to make submissions, he would poke me and slip me little notes about do this, do that, try this. I was getting really irritated because I felt I was doing a good job and I didn't need him interrupting me at the time that I was doing everything. Feedback later, maybe, but I'm right in the middle of my whole trial. Anyway, I kept smiling and kept going, and in my mind, kept winning. We took a short break so that I could use the washroom. When I came back, my dad said, "Oh, you know what? You got it careless." I'm like, "I'm sorry?" "Yeah, no, the Crown's agreeing to a careless, and so now we're starting with my trial." And I'm like, I don't want a careless. I was winning that trial. You can't just come in and start negotiating with the Crown on my file. It's my file. And I didn't even want a careless. I wouldn't have agreed to a careless. I was winning it. And he's like, "It's a small town. Everybody knows everybody. The police will hound him forever if he gets a full acquittal. This way you give the police a bone and they'll leave him alone." But it's my win. So the lesson I learned that day was do not go to trial with my father in the courtroom. He was also very controlling about how the office was run. And that's fine in many ways. When I look back on those years when I was practicing with my dad, I realize now I had a very luxurious way of practicing. Never once did he ever bother me about how my billings were or how things were going generally in the firm. His motto was, We don't practice law to make money. We make money so that we can practice law. And he lived by that. And I didn't always understand exactly what he meant by it, but during those first years, it was lovely not to think about having to close a file or how our office was doing that month, etc. I just always assumed things were going very well. I began my articles with my father in 2001. The years I spent with him are very precious. Then, in 2006, my dad passed away. I can't believe I'm getting this emotional, considering it has been how many years. I always do the math before I go into a trial. How long a gap was it between the screening device test and the samples at the station? Because under pressure, I can't do math. It's been too long and sometimes feels like yesterday. So my dad passed away in 2006, and my life turned upside down. My law life, my personal life, everything changed. That was such a scary time. Our office was worried that we wouldn't be able to survive. My father brought in more than all of the other lawyers combined, and none of us knew how to run an office. He had shut us out completely from all of that. So at the same time that we were grieving the loss of my father, my employer, the stability that we had always known in the office, and trying to handle the increased caseload because my father had not been retired when he passed away, we also had to learn how to run an office. We were just bewildered. But little by little, day after day, we started to right that ship. My father would have loved the maritime metaphor. He was a lobster fisherman in a previous life. That story will have to wait for another day. It took quite a long time, but after a few months, we made our first profit, and in honor of my father, we spent it all. We did not save a dime. We spread out that little fortune among staff and lawyers equally. I think we all got an extra $34 that month. But the real treasure, though, was everything else that he gave me. I had an office full of people enthusiastic about the law, the firm's reputation for excellent advocacy in the area of criminal law, and while my memory of some past events has become dim to the point of almost disappearing, it often happens that moments with my father erupt into my consciousness with startling clarity. He would have enjoyed this, the ability to reach out to all of you. If you stay tuned in, you will invariably hear more about my father since he continues to travel with me in my adventures in law and life.